Hello, my name is Dr. Laura, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I co-own a group practice, and my passion is working with people who have experienced abuse and neglect in childhood and have developed trauma disorders as adults, whether that's complex PTSD or dissociative disorders. I have been doing this for a good 20 years now, and I have learned so much, both from other professionals, but also from each and every one of my clients. And as I am nearing the middle of my career, I am thinking that I would really love to share some thoughts with all of you about some of the things I've learned and some of my observations. And I'm also open to hearing your thoughts and observations, whether you are also a clinician working with clients, or whether this is personal, whether this applies to your life or people you know, or maybe even both. So, yeah, enjoy and let me know what you think. Welcome to the Impact of Abuse and Neglect in Narcissistic Family Systems, Part 6. In this part, we're going to be talking about fawning defenses. And they warrant their own part because this is a very critical survival skill for people in narcissistic family systems. Fawning defenses are learned by everyone in a narcissistic family system. Fawning means you are, instead of waiting for someone to be abusive, you're trying to behave in a way that that person will be happy with you and therefore will not abuse and neglect you. Every single family member in a narcissistic family fawns, but it's possible that the most powerful person in the family only fawns to people outside of the home. So stereotypically, a parent may demand that the rest of the family defer to their wishes at home. However, in a work environment, they may be trying they may fawn with people they perceive as having more power than them at work. Or if they're a parent, they may fawn with other parents so that they're seen as having higher status among parents. The possibilities are endless for social groups. But the rest of what I'm going to be talking about here is fawning in the family system. So, fawning defenses in the family system are about actively trying to please someone who has more power than you in the family. And the purposes are like this. One, to avoid being a target of the abuse by obtaining value. You're trying to make yourself valuable to the person who has more power than you in the family system. And the second one is you're trying to, in any way you can, control the emotional state of the person who has the most power in the family system, or more power than you, as it may happen. This and the ways of doing this are absolutely infinite. Common ways are to anticipate that person's wishes or to distract them from engaging in abusive behavior. Will Smith does a great job about talking about narcissistic defenses in his memoir, Heavy. And he talks about he was the one among the children, his most favorite defense of the narcissistic defenses was humor. And he would make his dad laugh. And then when his dad laughed, he wouldn't be angry and he wouldn't rage and hurt everyone else in the family. So fawning defenses can also be used to get needs met that are not met in the narcissistic family system. And one of those needs is for attachment, as we talked about earlier. And another need is that need for attention and value, to be valued. Narcissistic neglect means that you're not usually valued for who you are, you're not valued inherently, and you're not valued for just expressing an interest and joy in the things that you care about. So that leaves a gap inside in terms of feeling valued. Well, one way to gain a sense of value is to please that powerful family member and to fawn with them, and then you have a sense of value and goodness. So perfectionism is a form of fawning and maybe I don't want to say the most common form of fawning, but I think almost all narcissistic family systems have some version of perfectionism. And perfectionism, I mean, most people know what that is, but in this context, it's trying to do things perfectly to avoid the abuse, or to get get that attention that you're not getting due to narcissistic neglect. Perfectionism can also include avoiding tasks that you don't do well because you don't want to fail. I'll talk more about that later. Perfectionism can also mean trying to appear perfect even when you're not. And this is the reason for the in an earlier part, I think part 3, I talked about common traits of narcissistic family systems, and one of those was appearing perfect to people outside of the family. That's a great example of everyone is aware that things are not perfect at home, but they must appear perfect to others. And this can lead to challenges in life, like you feel pressured to cheat on a test because you can't, you want to appear perfect to your teachers and therefore to your parents. You feel pressured to to dress a certain way, to have a certain car, to have a certain house, to have a certain job. All of this is about image and needing to appear perfect to whoever in the external world. And yeah, so those are forms of fawning that happen as well in the outside world. So part of perfectionism and what helps it carry on is the inner critic. And so we got the angry doll back here. The inner critic is that part of you that is constantly telling you what you're doing wrong. And the purpose of the inner critic, you might think, is just to make you feel like shit. But actually, no. The purpose of the inner critic is to get you to behave and to be perfect so that you can fawn, so that you are not subject to narcissistic abuse and experience catastrophic shame and humiliation. If you need to rewatch that little sentence a couple times, I totally understand, but it's building on the other parts of the presentation. So here I want to mention also the critic, because this is also an internal part. This is more directly related to externalizing defenses, but in the context of fawning, it makes sense to talk about it. The critic is that internal voice that's always trying to prove internally that one's own feelings, thoughts, and actions are valid and perfect, and it's other people who are flawed. Very often when I see adults who have come from narcissistic family systems, a lot of the therapy sessions, especially at the beginning, are the person going through times where their performance was questioned in some way, like someone was not happy with them and needing to assure themselves that whatever it was, they did it well enough, which is fine, which is not inherently bad or unhealthy, and none of this stuff is inherently unhealthy. It's just when it gets out of balance and when it gets stuck. But doing that self-justification from the position of the critic is explaining, well, but I did this correctly, and so that person was wrong when they told me I didn't, or I was right and they were wrong. It's very binary in that way. This informed by narcissistic injury, that only one person can be correct and one person can be incorrect. And what you have happening internally for many, many people in narcissistic families is this debate back and forth. Well, is it my fault? Is it their fault? Is it my fault? Is it their fault? Is it my fault? Is it their fault? And what comes out of your mouth depends on what defense you're using. So if you're fawning, you do not verbalize that it's someone else's fault. You verbalize only that it is your fault. And some people really lean in on the fawning and rarely let their critic out to tell someone else that, hey, this is your fault. In other words, they try to avoid those externalizing defenses and are more inclined towards fawning. Others frequently let the critic out because they shouldn't have to fawn to people because they're correct and other people are incorrect. Or they always end up fawning to some people. But on a day-to-day basis, more what gets expressed externally is the criticism more often. And they prefer not to fawn because that means you're in a lesser position. And I will say that not everyone has a critic. I have worked with people who were so both determined not to be abusive, so much so, but also really had truly internalized that shame and humiliation and sense of being less than, that critic voice was really not there. Um, and that's actually a problem. And it's tricky to work with and support somebody because they are often doing what's actually an ethical thing, like they're watching abuse around them and not wanting to be that person, and that's good. Um, Also, they're finding it more comfortable to blame themselves because that gives you a sense of control, whereas realizing that someone else is doing something wrong is scary. That's another reason someone may not have developed a critic, but sometimes that's part of the therapy process. Thank you for watching part 6 of this presentation. In part 7, we're going to continue talking about narcissistic defenses, moving on to defenses having to do with fleeing, flight. See you then.